Good morning, all. I'm
Morning.
honored to introduce our guest speaker this morning. Gareth Young is the co-founder and the guiding teacher of the Red Clay Sangha. He has maintained a committed meditation practice since 1999. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay. He has maintained the committed meditation practice since 1999 in the Zen, the Chan, and the Vipassana traditions. Gareth received Dharma transmission in the Thai forest lineage of Ajahn Chah, Jack Cornfield, and Lisa Ernst. He lives in the Atlanta area with his wife and their dogs, their chickens, and bees. He has two adult children. The title of this morning's Dharma talk is the dukkha and the end of dukkha. Gareth, we welcome you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone. It's an honor to be here. It's just, I don't know how long it is. Probably 20 years. About 15 years since I was here, probably. Long. Not unusual for us. It seems like yesterday. Grey hair does wonderful things to your perception of time, doesn't it? So the title of this talk is Dukkha and the End of Dukkha. It's a holding title because I never know what I'm going to talk about until it gets really close. And that the Buddha said, I teach two things. I teach dukkha, which is usually translated as suffering, and also stress, discontent, dis-ease, unsatisfactoriness, and the end of dukkha. And the Four Noble Truths are simply an expansion of that. Like the dukkha is the cause, is the existence of the cause, and the end is the path and the realization of the end of it. Cosmic chain of causation is an expansion of it too. Go up to cause it, come down to end it. So anyway, so it's like the heart of Buddhist teaching. So whatever I talk about, that works. What came up for me to talk about today is the Diamond Sutra. I was trying to think of what would be relevant and useful here, because if it's not useful, it's not much of a talk. And this is hopefully something that is familiar to many or most of you. And I'm going to I'm going to start reading through it. I'll talk as I go through it, and we'll see how far I get. I'm expecting to get through 6, 7, 8 chapters in here, and we'll just see how far it gets. Before I start, is anybody here not familiar with the Diamond Sutra? Not familiar with this? Okay. So I'll give just a few words on the Diamond Sutra before we get started. Buddha was born, but he taught. He taught 2,500 years ago, roughly, and his teachings continued in northern India. In the few hundred years after his death, not surprisingly, it all fragmented. We had a dozen, 24 dozen, couple of dozen. I think the number of people usually talk about is like 17 or something like that. But we had all of these schools emerge. And within these schools, they remembered the teachings which come down as the Vinaya, the Sutta Pitaka. They got written down around about 500 years after he died. They started being written down, but they were orally transmitted, all of his teachings. The Pali word is sutta, the Sanskrit word is sutra. Same thing, really. And the Vinaya, which was the monastic code that was followed. Around about, well, as these schools were fragmenting, the Abhidharma was created. And the Abhidharma was a codification of like the philosophy of the teaching, the nuts and bolts of what comes into the teaching. And one of the schools, the Sravastivardhan, is the one that's highlighted, but I'm sure there were others. Their Abhidharma kind of atomized Buddhism. So to call the 3 marks of existence impermanence, non-self, and dukkha. Non-self we know as emptiness, right? Same thing, non-self. But in this particular form of Abhidharma, it was kind of atoms were created. So emptiness of self meant I'm made up of all these other things, the lists, the balls we got over here, which I'm sure you hear different versions of those stories. But those became things in this teaching. And then one of the other schools, the Mahasangikas, they said, hang on, guys, you've gone way astray here. This is not what we were taught at all. There is nothing there. So there's this body of teachings came out. Nagarjuna was very instrumental in the formulation of this body of teaching, but it's a body of teaching that we just chanted from the Heart Sutra, which said those atoms are also empty. There's just, yes, we got an eye, but there's really no eye there. Yes, there's this 12-link chain of causation, but those actually aren't things. They too are empty. So the Diamond Sutra was one of the sutras that came out of that body of teaching. And it evolved through other teachings that came back more clearly to the middle, which came out of Tiantai, which is the Lotus Sutra, Huayan, Avatamsaka, and others. We may touch on those later today. But those came together. I mean, they profoundly influenced all Chinese and therefore all East Asian Buddhism, came together through this back to a middle teaching and through Chan into where we sit now, which is Zen. And the Diamond Sutra, there was a printed copy of the Diamond Sutra found, I think it was like 10 or 15 years ago, in the caves in Danshan, which is on the Silk Road. There's a whole bunch of Buddhist texts found in there. There were different versions of the Platform Sutra, Huineng, than had historically been read, which seemed like early versions, although the one we use, which is also in here, is like the fave. It's the one that's got all the history of hundreds of years of practice. But this particular copy of the Diamond Sutra was about 800 CE, and it was printed. It's the first known printed text. So this text has a really long and dignified history. All right, so beginning the sutra. Thus have I heard, upon a time, or at that time, Buddha sojourned in Anathapindika's park by Sravasti with a great company of bhikshus, even 1,250. One day, at the time for breaking fast, the world-honored one, enrobed and carrying his bowl, made his way into the great city of Sravasti to beg for his food. In the midst of the city, he begged from door to door according to rule. This done, he returned to his retreat and took his meal. When he had finished, he put away his robe and begging bowl, washed his feet, arranged his seat, and sat down. Sounds really, really simple, banal, bland, but there's a lot going on here. There are some commentators who tell you this is the whole sutra right here, and in a way it is. So first off, it begins with "Thus have I heard," which are the words of Ananda, who was his attendant for most of his teaching years, not all of them, but for most of his teaching years. And sutras begin with that. At that time, at what time? The time and location, we could wax eloquent of it. There's another, this will come up, but the I in "Thus have I heard," the time in "at that time," these are places that the teaching lands on in order to communicate it, but these are also empty. These are not things to be held on to. So who is this Ananda? Empty. I mean, as we talk through this, when is this at that time? Past, present, future. We talk this kind of friendly to talk about being in the present moment. There is no present moment, folks. There just isn't. Find it, show it to me. There is no present moment. There's being present. Present moment is finding a locus in this thing we call time, which is a creation in which that arises because we have events. And in order to understand and talk about events, we have to have this thing we call time to drop them into. So these, thus have I heard upon a time, Anathapindika's park by Sravasti. Sravasti was the capital city. So there's a lot I could talk about Anathapindika and Sravasti. But this is in northern India. Sravasti is where, Anathapindika's park in particular is where Buddha spent more range retreats than anywhere else during his teaching career. It's to the extent he had a home. This is as close as you'll get to his home. And he's there with 1,250 bhikshus. This is totally unlike most of the sutras you're going to be familiar with. It's very similar, actually, to the way a lot of the Pali Sutras begin. Buddha's just there with his monks. Mahayana Sutras begin, Buddha's there with this huge retinue of monks and another huge retinue of bodhisattvas and retinues of rakshas and all sorts of beings from other realms. And he sits there and flowers come down from heaven. A beam of white light comes from between his eyebrows. It's much more colorful and flowery. And there's meaning behind all of that. There's really, really important meaning in why that is portrayed in these sutras. This is a very different start to a sutra. What's that about? Breaking fast, carrying his bowl, made his way into the city to beg for food. You're all familiar with, I think, he was actually basically an ascetic. The story of Buddha is he practiced with these two teachers, didn't get what he wanted from them. They were going to elevate him. They offered to elevate him to the seat alongside him, the highest teaching role in their community. And he said, no, this isn't it. I'm seeking the end of dukkha. I'm seeking complete release. This is not it. Thank you. Move on. Then he tried practicing with 5 ascetics. And they're called the 5 ascetics, but it was beyond ascetic practice. There was self-punishment going on, really. They were starving themselves, they were hurting their bodies. And this comes from a tradition in northern India of punishing the body in order to liberate Atman from the body. Buddha did this for 5 years. He said, this isn't working either. So he went off. The rest, he sat under a tree, woke up, and Sujata brought him a bowl of rice, and he went under a tree, said, I'm going to sit here until I wake up or die trying, and he woke up. But when he woke up and he engaged in practice, he owned the robes, he owned his bowl, and the rules for the monastic order, you could have like a toothpick, you could take medicine, you could have 2 sets of robes, you could have like 4 or 5 possessions. It was a really tiny number of possessions. This, folks, is an ascetic life. We talk about the middle way. We don't understand what the middle way is. We'll get to the middle way in a minute, but we really don't understand what he was talking about most of the time when we talk about the middle way, because it's not a compromise between too much stuff and not enough stuff. It's not what it's about at all. He was, if you were asked to do this, it's really radical. It's a really radical way of life. According to the rule, begged according to the rule, which is without any discrimination whatsoever. So they, I believe they were allowed to knock on 7 doors, and they'd typically go into town together, and they'd all do this and then come back and assemble and share the food. But the idea was you treat everybody equally. Shariputra, who is the antagonist in this sutra, he tended to knock on the doors of the more affluent people. Better food, more food. He tended to like being invited to people's houses for meals. And so the householders, of whom Anapandika, who we talked about, was one, they would invite the monastic community to their dwelling and give them food there, serve them food. That was a great offering, and it was an offering for the monastics to go and receive that. So Shariputra liked to hang out and all that stuff. What's his name? The guy who received the flower. Kashyapa. Kashyapa was exactly the opposite. Kashyapa was really hardcore forest dweller. Didn't go and hang out in Deer Park and these other community places. He was off in the woods. And he would go knock on the doors of the poor people. Buddha told both of them off for discriminating. Don't do that. Just got to go to all of them equally. When he returned to his retreat and took his meal, when he'd finished, he put away his robe and beggar bowl, washed his feet, arranged his seat, and sat down. That's what we all did this morning. We came in here, we put our lives down, led our ordinary lives, came in here, put them down, and sat down. That's what he's talking about here. But I don't know about you. When I was putting my ordinary life down and coming in here, my ordinary life included driving over here in the car with my mind bouncing around. It was not bouncing around a lot, but it was bouncing around. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about having a still, concentrated mind that is just present. And the sitting down, the word you'll use is zazen, right? The sitting down, just sitting. It is just sitting. There's a sutta in the Pali Canon, Bahia, It's called the Bahia Sutta because it's about this guy called Bahia. It's about 2 pages long, and the story is roughly Bahia is down in the southeast of India somewhere, and he's a serious solo practitioner, fairly advanced practitioner. And he's wandering around and thinking to himself, I wonder if I'm awakened. I wonder if I'm on the right path to awakening. And the Dewa picks up his thoughts and shows up and says, dude, you're not awake. And no, you're not even on the right path. But he says, what should I do? And the Dewa says, well, this person up, like 1,000, 1,500 miles away, so you should go visit him. He's called the Buddha. Okay, so Bahia traipses across India. And of course, bare feet, walking across India, just your bowl, just your robes. The sutra is a little unclear. Either he very quickly walked all the way across India, or there was some mystical occurrence where he transported himself. Either of them is equally miraculous. I mean, this is a long way to go under your own power, when most of it is walking through forests with bandits and wild animals, dangerous animals. So he walked all the way up there. He gets there, he goes to Anathapindika's park, which is where he understood Buddha was. And the monastic said, no, he's not here right now. He's out in town, begging for food. So Bahia goes into town, finds the Buddha, just this person who's glowing, walking around with his bowl. That's got to be the Buddha. So he goes up and says, you the Buddha? Will you teach me? Will you teach me? And the Buddha says, now is not the right time. I'm out on my rounds. But he says, you've got to, please, 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 please teach me. Same answer. Third time, please, please, please teach me. The Buddha, when you ask the Buddha 3 times, he teaches. That's the rule. So Buddha said, okay, well, here's what it is. When you should train yourself thus, when there is seeing, there is just seeing. When there is hearing, there is just hearing. When there is sensing, there is just sensing. When there is cognizing, mental activity, there is just cognizing. Train yourself that way. When you accomplish that, when in seeing there is just seeing and hearing, etc., then there is no you there. And when there's no you there, you're not here, you're not there, and you're not in between. This, just this, is the end of dukkha. So this is Zazen. This is what Buddha's doing here. And this is actually what Buddha was doing when he was out begging for food. There was just walking. There was just begging. There was just eating. And now there's just sitting. There's no me in the middle of this. There's subjective experience, sure. Needs subjective experience in order to navigate, in order to hold out the bowl, receive the food, make contact, and make a little bow. Needs subjective experience in order to eat. Doesn't mean there's a subject in the middle of this subjective experience. The subject that we create is an accident. It arises and we take it as real. It's not. So this is what's going on in this first chapter. So we go on to the second chapter. I'm going to take my watch off so I have some idea quite how long I'm taking here. It's going to take a lot. You'll bail me out when I'm at time. So the second chapter, thank you for the tea, by the way. Now, in the midst of the assembly was the venerable Subhuti. Forthwith he arose, uncovered his right shoulder, knelt upon his right knee, and respectfully raising his hands with palms joined, addressed the Buddha thus. World-honored one, it is most precious how mindful the Tathagata is of all the bodhisattvas, protecting and instructing them so well. World-honored one, if good men and good women seek the consummation of incomparable enlightenment, Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, by what criteria should they abide and how should they control their thoughts? Buddha said, very good, Subhuti. Just as you said, the Tathagata is ever mindful of the bodhisattvas, protecting and instructing them well. Now listen and take my words to heart. I wish to declare to you by what criteria good men and good women seeking the consummation of incomparable enlightenment should abide and how they should control their thoughts. Said Subhuti, pray do, world-honored one. With joyful anticipation, we long to hear. The English in this is a little archaic at times. This is the first. This is by A.F. Price. It's A.F. Price. This is the first translation of the Diamond Sutra into English, and it's been updated a couple of times over the years. But some of the more archaic English survives, which I kind of like. So, what's going on here? So Subhuti just goes through the standard approach of the time, asking a question, whether it's well, it's just the standard approach we all have. Cultural approaches to asking a question, offering respect, showing I'm safe. Handshake is to show I don't have a weapon. Right? I mean, there's lots of things we do. So he's going through that standard approach. And then Subhuti says, world-honored one, it is most precious how mindful the Tathagata is. When you read the suttas, there are 10 epithets of the Buddha you'll come across. And in Pali, it runs Bhagava Arahang Samma Sambuddho Veja Charana Sampano Sugata and so on. It's the same 10. I was in Bodh Gaya earlier this year. Actually, I went on a pilgrimage to India with Beth, my wife. And when we were at Bodh Gaya, there were groups of monastics who were circumambulating, just chanting this over and over and over. And then at Kushinagar, they chanted it over and over and over. And then they went into the temple space in the middle, and there's it's about as long as this room, actually. Actually, the place itself is about the size of this room, and the horizontal reclined Buddha in his death pose is most of the length of this room, with a little gap at each end. So they circumambulated this, chanting this again and again and again. So when you come across those 10 epithets, they have a very long and distinguished history, and each one of them has a really deep meaning. It's kind of off track to get into them, so I won't, but recognize each of those 10 names. They're not just words thrown around. There is real thought and care and meaning behind each of those 10 epithets. It's very precious, most precious how mindful the Tathagata is. Mindful. What is mindful? So mindfulness is a tradition that shows up a lot in the Pali-oriented traditions, the Southern Asian traditions, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Thailand. Not so much in the East Asian traditions by that name, but it is something that is deeply practiced, and it is something that is really important. So when you're sitting zazen, or when you're in the car and your mind is caught and wandering off, being mindful is what allows us to notice this and to come back. That's what mindfulness is. There's a sutta in the Pali Canon, the Satipatthana Sutta, which means the four foundations of mindfulness. And in many Chan traditions, those four foundations are used. So these teachings, actually, it comes through Tiantai. The Lotus Sutra was the foundational sutra, the sutra that Ji based his teachings on, and it's upheld as the supreme sutra, not because Tiantai, which is the school that was founded out of it, holds itself as hierarchically the highest teaching. It's not they have an insight nobody else has. It's upheld as the supreme teaching because it is all-inclusive. Ji systematized all the teachings. The teachings landed in China in this higgledy-pig way. So imagine we're all sitting in here and somebody brings up a dump truck outside and unloads a bunch of music from the 60s. So we've got all these DVDs and CDs of like the Beatles and I can't think of 60s bands, right? Led Zeppelin maybe. And then you get somebody who comes in and with another dump truck, and we get a whole bunch of hip hop. And then somebody comes with another one, and we get some classical era string quartets. What do we do with all of this? Because from our perspective, this has all arrived at the same time. Utterly confusing. So this is what happened in China in the first 200-300 years CE. Ji systematized all of this, and he came up with a structure that recognized 5 categories. He had the agamas, which were the Chinese translations of the Nikayas, the Pali suttas. Then he had a basket which he called the Vaipulya, which had the Vimalakirti and a couple of other things. I think Shurangama was in there. And then he had Prajnaparamita, which includes this and Heart Sutra. Then he had, what else? Maybe it was just four. No, it was four. He had 5 baskets. I'm missing one. But the other, no, there were 2 other baskets. One of the other baskets was the Avatamsaka Sutra, which is what gave rise to the Huayan school. And what he thought about the Avatamsaka, he said this teaching lasted for a week. This is what Buddha actually experienced when he woke up. But he realized it was not capable of being communicated at that time, so he put it aside, launched into teaching the Nikayas, which lasted 48 years. And then in the middle of that, these other teachings showed up and they lasted for a long while. So there's overlaps in the duration of these different teachings. And then the last one was the Lotus Sutra, which showed up at his time of death. So the approach is there's all these different ways of teaching. The responsibility and duty of somebody in the role of being a teacher is to look at everybody they're working with, spot that person's history, spot that person's proclivity, understand their karmic history, and teach in a way that resonates with that person. Different people will have different proclivities. And those proclivities may change over time. And I'm sure that's happened with many of you. What's something that worked 10 years ago just doesn't work now. You shift. So that's why it's held as the supreme teaching. It holds itself as the supreme teaching. Anyway, we're talking about mindfulness. Mindfulness and the 4 foundations of mindfulness is incorporated through this approach in many East Asian traditions as a mindfulness practice. Ji also wrote, his seminal text was, he wrote a couple of major commentaries on the Lotus Sutra, but he wrote a text called Moho Chiguang, I believe it was, which generally translated as the great treatise on calming and insight, which you can think of it as the big book on stopping and seeing, if you like. And in this, and this was the text that was used to teach and to look across all these different methodologies, all these different sutras and bodies of teaching, and how to teach within them, mindfulness shows up. So, Satipatthana Sutta. Mindfulness in the Satipatthana Sutta, sati means mindfulness, but we're talking about samasati, which is right mindfulness. Right mindfulness, which is the Noble Eightfold Path element, is defined as, and it shows up many times in the Pali Canon, ardent, alert, and sati, mindful. Ardent is the energy, the diligence, the effort we put into our practice. This is right effort, right? I mean, this is the simile of the lute. Do it too tight, doesn't play, you break the strings. Tune it too loose, doesn't work at all. Tune it just right, the Goldilocks lute, it works perfectly. And that's not just single string, you've got to tune all the strings. So if there's 6 strings, you've got to tune all the strings so they're in harmony with each other, which would be our 6 sense gates, right? And there are different methods of tuning. I mean, and musicians among you will know of well-tempered and even-tempered, which derive from classical era tuning. There are subtle differences in how we tune instruments. You've got to tune the instrument just right for it to work. This is how ardency, this is how effort works. And we are the only person who can judge that for ourselves. If we're finding ourselves slacking, getting lazy, we're not putting enough effort in. If we find ourselves getting too tense with our practice, find ourselves just off track, we're probably putting in too much effort. We need to back off a little bit. There are people who can help us, but we have to really self-regulate that. Seek advice, but we're the person in charge of that. Alert is actually seeing what is going on, what is happening right now. The mind is wandering off. I have to have ardency to notice that, but the seeing that is the alertness. And the sati, as one of those 3 factors, is translated as memory. And what's that memory of? Well, it's memory of the teachings. Don't mind to wander off. Not where we're headed here. That's not conducive to the practice I want. That's not conducive to the freedom I'm trying to cultivate. remembering what I've done in the past that worked. When I was sitting and I entered this very peaceful state that was conducive to calm, was conducive to insight, what was I doing that helped that facilitated that? We're not clinging on to something, clinging on to the state, but we're remembering how we were practicing. What kind of energy did I take in? Did I do some prostrations ahead of time? Did I do some repentance work yesterday? What was it I did that led to this being a particularly settled and productive meditation period? Conversely, mind really scattered. I came in, I didn't do prostrations, I came straight off, I rushed into the Zendo, and I knew I'd be rushing off afterwards, so I was preoccupied, not skillful. This is the flavor of remembering. So Subhuti is acknowledging here that the Buddha was mindful, supremely mindful. Unlike effort, right effort, right effort is balanced. You can do too much or too little. Right mindfulness isn't really balanced in the same way. You can't have too much mindfulness. Being mindful is being present. It's being clear. It's seeing clearly. It's remembering, being fully connected with everything and present to do that. So the world-honored one was, it is most precious how mindful the Tathagata is, protecting and instructing them so well. So here's the question. If good men and good women seek consummation of incomparable enlightenment, by what criteria should they abide and how should they control their thought? And the Buddha responds, very good, it's just as you say. And then he says, I will declare to you by what criteria should abide and how they should control their thoughts. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to talk about controlling thoughts. That's something we don't often like to talk about because control, what is this control thing? Everything's free, right? But this fits in with this whole point about mindfulness. If we don't do something to train, we're trying to train our mind. So control may not be the right word. Pacify is another word I've seen used to translate this. But there's something going on here, something that Subhuti is rightly asking about. He wants to know how to train, how to control, how to calm his mind, and where his mind should abide, where he should rest his mind. There's a thing here called, this points to, we need a method. We need a meditation method. If we just come and say, I'm just going to do Zazen, I'm just going to say, I don't need a teacher, I don't need teachings, I don't need nothing, I'm just going to sit. Well, probably going to be unproductive. Because you're just going to sit, your mind's going to bounce around all over the place, you're not going to know what to do with that, and you're not going to have any structure in which to place that. Methods. Anapanasati, which is the old Pali tradition, in-breath, out-breath, that means. Mindful of in-breath, out-breath. That's methods of following the breath. We rest our attention on the breath. That's where we place our mind. And we can place it in a location, tip of the nose, tanden. We can follow the breath. We can place it on numbers that we use to count the breath, but we're placing our mind somewhere. You can place it on posture. A lot of the work in Zazen is coming back to posture, right? You can place mind on posture. You're resting your mind somewhere. You can place the mind's attention on the mind itself. Before you get to that, you place the mind on sensory experiences. Silent illumination, which is a charm practice, is sitting in a place of complete openness, aware of what's happening at the sense gates. Not judging, not holding on, not rejecting, but just completely aware of what's going on at the sense gates. Aware of a sound, aware of a sight, aware of a smell. Not labeling, not judging. It's a method. It's a place to put your mind. And the mind can just be aware of it, a place to be aware of itself. Watching your mental activity, getting behind your mental activity to just rest in looking at the qualities of mind. Bright, radiant, alive, vibrant. There's There's an energy in there that you just rest in that. So placing the mind somewhere. And when our mind wanders, we come back to our method. Where do I rest my mind? And how do I control my mind? Which is what allows me to cultivate the ability to stay with my method. Staying with my method is what allows me to get into this just sitting, just eating. So really, how do I do that? And the Buddha says, I'll declare to you how. And then Subhuti says, world honored one, with joyful anticipation, we long to hear. That last sentence has to come in a pause. You wouldn't ask that sentence if Buddha was just going to launch straight into a teaching. You'd wait for him to teach. I got this from the only place I've seen this written, and it's the best commentary I've read on the Diamond Sutra. It's by Zen Master Huai Chin, Chan Master Huai Chin. And it's probably out of print now. I think it'll cost like $100 to get second-hand copies, but it's available for free on one of these archive book sources. But it's an amazing book. Anyway, so his point is that was the teaching. I will teach thus. And he's sitting there. This is how you control your mind. This is where your mind abides. Teaching beyond words. The answer. Shariputra missed it. So all the rest of the sutra is the second level teaching. There's another story. This is Journey to the West. And I get the characters in the wrong order, but it's Chinese, talked about, I think, as being the first novel. Shariputra and a monkey and a couple of other characters are traveling around, and they go off to Journey to the West. And at some point along the way, they go up to some heavenly abode, seeking the Buddhist teachings. And they meet Manjushri. And they ask for the teaching. And he says, well, you can have the teaching if you make a donation. He says, well, we shouldn't have to make a donation for the teaching. So I think it was the monkey who was doing this, but it may have been Subhuti. I think it was the monkey. Anyway, so they make this donation resentfully. Manjushri says, okay, here you are. Here's the teaching. Thank you. And as they're walking out, the monkey says to Subhuti, hold on. There's something suspicious about that guy there. I don't trust him. I just don't think something funny's going on here. Look at the teaching. What's he given you? It's a blank scroll. I told you there was something wrong here. There's nothing there. And they go back, and Manjushri's being castigated by these people. And the Buddha hears the noise, and he comes in and says, what's going on? And Manjushri tells him, he says, oh, you shouldn't have given them the highest teaching. You should have given them the second highest teaching. That's exactly what's going on here. Buddha gave them the highest teaching, and they gave Subhuti the highest teaching, and he didn't get it. It's also what happens at the later stages of the Vimalakirti Sutra, which is another sutra that heavily informed Chan and therefore Zen. And in that one, Vimalakirti is a layperson who's sick. But he's not really sick. He's faking it in order to offer teachings to all the arhats and all the bodhisattvas who are floating around, right? And Buddha's there with this enormous retinue of bodhisattvas and arhats. Like I said, most of the sutras start with, and there's all these wonderful things about the teachings that are going to flow forth and all the rest of it. And he said, by the way, there's this dude over here, Vimalakirti, is sick. You'll need to go visit him and give him some teachings and help him feel better. Oh, I don't want to go see him. Last time I went to see him, he humiliated me in this way. Oh, I don't want to go see him because, I don't, goes on down the line. Anyway, they finally all go in there. And the name Hojo, which is the honorific for Tayun Chan, comes from the Vimalakirti Sutra. The Hojo is the room in which they all assemble. It's like a 10-foot square room, which in Zen tradition is the abbot's quarters. And we're not all going to fit in there. They all get in there, and then all these beings from other Buddha lands come in, and all these Buddhas start floating around, and all these Buddhas. So this becomes this kaleidoscopic event with just everybody in this 10-foot square room, which is, Hojo is the capacity to hold all of that with compassion and wisdom. So anyway, so Manjushri engages in a conversation with him. It's about what is emptiness. And They'll give answers, and Vimalakirti kind of nods with a little smile on his face. And then Manjushri says, "So what's your answer?" Vimalakirti just sits there. And it shows up in a number of colons as well, like that highest teaching. Got to be careful with that, though, because the highest teaching is actually invisible. There's an argument that Vimalakirti actually wasn't delivering the highest teaching because it would be invisible. He's being very intentional about holding this form, this posture, right? And there's a visible demonstration of this. So is there something a little more than emptiness going on here? Got to be careful with this. Anyway, so that's what's going on. As I say, it's the only place I've come across this particular interpretation, but it just feels right. That's what's going on here. So then Buddha launches into his teaching. So we finish at 11, right?
And
At 11:30, we finish it then.
Oh, so we finished the talk at 11:30?
No, oh, you can if you want.
Okay. Well, we finish, everybody goes home at noon.
Oh, we've all done lunch. We're body lunch.
Yeah.
I can.
Okay, so we've got plenty of time.
You have to get something out of this.
No, I don't. But thank you for the thought. So the next chapter, Buddha said, Subhuti, all the bodhisattva mahasattvas should discipline their thoughts as follows. All living creatures of whatever class, which is, talking among other things, well, he lists the classes, born from eggs, wombs, moisture, transformation, whether with form, without form, whether in the state of thinking exempt from thought necessary or wholly beyond all thought realms, all these are caused by me to attain unbounded liberation nirvana. All beings, all beings. The teaching is when the Buddha wakes up, every creature wakes up. The whole universe wakes up. There's something mysterious, which we'll get into. I'll make sure we get into this. It might be the last thing I get into. But there's something mysterious happens when the Buddha wakes up. That means everything wakes up. Every one of you. You are already awake. Every one of you is already fully manifesting your Buddha nature. But you don't quite believe it. You don't quite practice it. There are these karmic obstructions. There are your proclivities that are like this dust on top that get in the way of exposing that. But from the Buddha's standpoint, when he wakes up, he sees through all of that and sees the enlightened nature of the entire universe, everything. Yet when vast, uncountable, immeasurable numbers of beings have been liberated, verily no being has been liberated. Why is this, Subhuti? It is because no bodhisattva who is a real bodhisattva cherishes the idea of an ego entity, a personality, a being, or a separated individuality. So, I'll probably finish on this chapter, I think. The Tathagata is what Buddha called himself. He didn't go around calling, and there's no absolute here. There are probably places you can find where he called himself Buddha and he called himself Shakyamuni, he called himself lots of things probably, but most of the time, Buddha calls himself Tathagata, which can be read as Tathagata or Tathagata. That middle A this Pali is a language which lends itself to wordplay. And if you read the Pali Suttas, there's a lot of very intentional wordplay. I mentioned the Satipatthana Sutta. That's the same. Satipatthana, Sati Upatthana. And one means foundations and one means establishings. So they're slightly different meanings. So Tathagata translates as either thus come or thus gone. As if come, as if gone. The name represents the asymmetry here. We see the Buddha. We see a human being, albeit a human being who's unlike any other human being we've ever met. They've got the form of a human being, but they're glowing. There's nothing sticks. You can feel their energy. It's just, there's nothing but compassion there. So there's something very different to the extent that when Buddha, after his enlightenment, went back to the mendicants he'd been practicing with, they looked in the distance and said, "That's that guy who used to practice with us. What's he coming back here for? We don't want to have anything to do with him." And then as he got closer, there's something different. And he got closer still. What are you? Are you a human? No. Are you a god? No. What are you? I'm awake. So from the outside, albeit a very different form, we see a human, we see a person, we recognize something's different. From the inside, as if come, as if gone. There's the tetralemma. Exist, not exist, both exist, neither exist nor not exist. Again, in the Pali tradition, there are a handful of questions the Buddha refused to answer. And one of them was, what happens to a Tathagata after this physical form dies? Does a Buddha exist after death? Does Tathagata exist after death? Not a well-formed question. Not exist, not well-formed. Both, neither, not well-formed. They don't grasp. They're not questions that are capable of grasping the reality of the situation. The awakened mind is utterly incomprehensible. So from one side, you've got this physical form, human being, and from the other side, there's just incomprehensibility, which we cannot grasp, cannot possibly get close to grasping. So this is complete freedom. The practice is about liberation, nirvana, and we don't understand it. We think this is about me being freed. It's not. There is no me here in the first place. I talked about that earlier. There's subjective experience, but the reification of a subject in the middle of this is just a fundamental error. There is nobody there. So this liberation that we're talking about here is the recognition suddenly, oh, clarity. And there's not even registering anything about the loss of this subjective experience, this subject. There's just, oh, clarity. So there is not anybody who's freed. You are not freed. I'm not freed. None of us are freed, right? It's just freedom. Subjectless, objectless freedom. So what that means, I lied, I'm going to touch on the next one, because the point I want to make comes into this. Furthermore, Subhuti, in the practice of charity, a bodhisattva should be detached. That is to say, he or she should practice charity without regard to appearances, without regard to sound, color, touch, flavor, or any other quality. Subhuti, thus should the bodhisattva practice charity without attachment. So this ties completely in with this description of freedom of awakening. There's the asymmetry, that's the just and just sitting. There's nobody there who's just sitting. There's awareness of this array of sensory inputs, but they don't come together as a person. It's just awareness, and it's optional whether to interact with them or not. There's the ability to completely refocus mind. So he teaches what does he teach? Let me go back up to the word. All these are caused by me to attain unbounded liberation nirvana. Yet when vast, uncountable, immeasurable numbers of beings have been liberated, verily no being has been liberated. So this awakened experience is a complete eradication of any subjective frame of reference. One of the core principles of this whole Buddhist project is to radically change our frame of reference. Now, we can do it to change our frame of reference to see things within the four foundations of mindfulness, with reference to the body, the feelings, and so forth. We can change it to be with reference to our relationships to Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. We can change it, and this is the word dukkha and the end of dukkha, we can change it to be simply dukkha and the end of dukkha. That is a complete frame of reference which is sufficient to experience the whole world. We can flesh it out. Four Noble Truths, 12-link chain of causation, as I said, they're expansions of this, but they're basically on these two orthogonal axes. Dukkha and the end of dukkha. That's our frame of reference. So within that frame of reference, shifting completely to that frame of reference, that loss of subject is the complete end of dukkha. There's no subject, so it's not the complete end of dukkha for the subject. It is the complete end of dukkha, period. End of dukkha everywhere, for all time. It defies time and space. They don't make sense there. This is the end of dukkha. Okay, done. This is another one of the things. No, I'm not done. You don't get rid of me that easy. Okay, the practitioner is done. And this is, that split I talked about between the Sravastivadins and the Mahasangikas. This is one of the accusations. You guys, you think you're done and you're running off into this dim and distant past and this dim and distant place where you're all just liberated. Look around you, suffering beings. And it becomes over time this split where lots of stories are told on both sides of the split. And, those of us who've been through divorces and other difficult separations recognize how stories just grow and things just appear in these stories. Chasms grow. But at its root, this really is a distinction without a difference, because for the truly awakened mind, for truly awakened mind, there is no the truly awakened. For truly awakened mind, there is nothing but compassion. Truly awakened mind is wisdom, is samadhi. The silent illumination teachings of Hongzhi, which deeply informed Chan. Dan Layton wrote a book which translated them. More recently, Guagu has done the same. They're just lovely teachings. But the silent illumination teachings say that that stillness that we can touch into on the cushion, this is moving us into silence. That is the awakened mind. When we can practice, we sit, we notice sounds going on. We used to sit at Zonalite, where we had like these granite bricks on the wall, and people would talk about the dragons they'd seen in the bricks and the birds they saw, all these patterns you might make. Candle Park. I'm sorry. Candle Park. Yeah. So people would talk about all these things, right? And that's what the mind does. If you sit there and you look at this, what you can do, so let's do this with sound. It's easier to understand with sound, but the same is fundamentally true with vision. If you sit there with sound, in the first instance, you notice the sound of a leaf blower. The leaf blower is not doing anybody any harm at all. The leaf blower is just fine. Leaf blower becomes a problem when we go out to meet it. It's me. It's not the leaf blower at all. It's what I'm doing. It's the problem. I'm leaking. So the leaf blower is just fine. If we get to where we can accept the leaf blower is just fine, then we notice there's a leaf blower, there's somebody sniffing, there's somebody coming in the door a minute ago, there's stuff going on in the environment. We notice this, and then there's silence. We settle in, and we notice, actually, experientially, there's really no difference between sound and silence. We hear sound, we hear silence. Distinguishing between them is something we do. It's not a real distinction. So we can settle in, and I think you still talk about the Surgama Sutra a lot, which is Avalokiteshvara's. navigate includes Avalokiteshvara's navigation through this. It's how Avalokiteshvara said he woke up, he or she. So we withdraw the senses, and the distinction between sound and silence disappears. We're aware of something, but the distinctions we make between individual sounds and between sound and silence disappears. As we keep settling in and withdrawing and placing our awareness through our mindfulness, through our method, all the rest, into a more subtle place, we withdraw into, or we settle down into, just the quality of hearing. Just the quality of hearing. There's just hearing. There is not sound on the end of it. It's not an experience, because you're not experiencing anything. There is just the quality of hearing. And you settle down more behind that. There's just the quality of arising and ceasing. And you can keep going until you're down to just this mind, just mind. Keep on. It's a matter of cultivating. This is what we do when we become the controlling, the training the mind is important, because we have to settle, become calm, and become focused, and keep that intensity of practice there in order to be able to notice what we're doing, in order to be able to bring our mind to close out the clutter, to not to close out, but not to be distracted by the clutter, because the mind wants to go off. That's what we do. Shiny objects. So we've got to stay concentrated, and that takes this right effort. Stay concentrated. That allows us to settle. That allows us to stay calm, become increasingly calm, so we can apply our focus at ever more subtle levels, until we get down into what we're talking about here. So this place of complete release, this is the silence, this is the stillness. It's alive, it's vibrant. But it's incomprehensible. Words and language don't belong there. Words and language can't go there. Time and space don't go there. It's incomprehensible. Silent illumination. This is the illumination. Everything. This is the illumination. Samadhi, wisdom, radiates. And if it's experienced through wisdom, it's already enlightened. It's miraculous. If it's experienced through ignorance, lack of understanding of the Four Noble Truths, lack of comprehension of our original nature, however we want to describe it, but it's the lack of ignorance. Ignorance is lack of understanding of this basic teaching. Then it shows up as dukkha. So, from the perspective of the awakened mind, you've got those two things simultaneously. You've got samadhi. These are the words that are used in Platform Sutra. You've got samadhi, which is the stillness, the silence, the settledness. And you've got prajna, which is the radiation, the illumination, the world we experience. Also, compassion. That is compassion. But from that place, the only thing that can happen is to see all of this unnecessary dukkha. Everybody is already fully awake, doing Buddha activities all the time. They get these stupid little stories going on. This selfing happening, causing dukkha for themselves and others, and it's heartbreaking and just not necessary. The only move when that is seen from a place of no self is a move into alleviating suffering, alleviating dukkha. So, the enlightened one sees there are no beings out there. There's just activity. There's just Buddha nature flowering in this incredible, beautiful way. And yet, we all show up as ourselves and do all the harm we do. So this is when all beings are liberated, verily nobody is liberated. And a true bodhisattva does not hold on to an ego, personality, a being, or a self. ego, personality, being, and self. There's those kind of pointed self, other, and time. So it's space-time separation. It's all in there. And then you get to the next chapter, which is talking about compassion, which is talking about charity, acts of charity. Bodhisattva, of course, from this place, what can a bodhisattva do? But engage in acts of charity, but engage in acts of helping other beings. That's all a bodhisattva can possibly do. Bodhisattva being a person, if you go to the, just for the nerds among us, if you go to the Avatamsaka Sutra, there are like 52 levels of bodhisattva. There's 5 groups of 10, and then there's 2 mysterious ones at the end.
One per week.
Yeah, that's one way of looking at it. That would be a very good year. It would be a very good year. And I forget which one. It's like the 46th or the 47th of these is the level of Arhat. And the 52nd is like, what's his name? Bhadra, who's enlightened, is just a manifestation of enlightened activity to help all others. That's Samantabhadra is like the central bodhisattva in the Huayan teachings and in the Tiantai teachings. So it's a very special place in those. So the point of that is, but arhats are bodhisattvas. They're actually very advanced bodhisattvas, but they are shy of this full Buddhahood. And this full Buddhahood, imagine this, because this is a thought experiment. Taking what I've talked about with mind to a step further, full Buddhahood, there is just a complete comprehension of all arising, all abiding, all ceasing. No self in the middle of it. Just total awareness of mind. Total awareness of mind means knowing what's happening at every moment. In your head, in your body. That's why people don't have any friction with the Buddha at all. There's absolutely no resistance there. This manifestation that shows up as Buddha is completely in tune with the entire universe in the grand scale and then in the micro scale of individual interactions. So all the bodhisattva can do, so the bodhisattvas are shy of that, but they're only just shy of it, right? So they are capable of really deep and passionate activity. And they have to do that. That's all they can do. But they do it without any craving, without accumulating any merit, without any sense of a me in the middle of it. We've all experienced this when somebody, a young person we know or love, or a pet, does something stupid, and we just spring into something dangerous, and we just spring into action to help. We don't think about me at that moment. This is enlightened activity. There's no me in the middle of it. It's just care. The gap, of course, is that we see a dog or we see a child from this side, which is actually there's an act of selfing and othering going on within this. So there's an edge in here where it slips off into unenlightened activity really quickly. It's as close as we're going to get to true compassionate activity, and it's really beautiful. But true charity, true compassionate action is without any reference point. So this goes on for another 49 chapters, and I could keep going, but it's now almost 12 o'clock, so I'll stop talking. And if we have time for questions and conversation, I would love to have some.
I have 10 minutes. We usually go back and forth online in-house. Thank you so much for that talk. I've always maintained that Buddhism's teachings are essentially belaboring the obvious.
Yeah.
And you have just spent about an hour. Wonderful job of that. So let's take a question or comment from the room first, and John, we'll go to you next.
Right.
I love this idea that you you talked about the relationship with the senses and how to get to places where the senses aren't there.
Yeah.
And when these sitting techniques were first established, this was as close as they could get to sensory deprivation.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to ask. I was like, so how do you think that relates to our modern practice?
This is a meditation you can engage in. Sensory deprivation is actually I've done it once or twice, and it's fun, but didn't do it for me.
Yeah, they have a float center over a little 5 points, and I've tried it. It's not the same.
It's not the same. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. There's something. There's an awareness there. But you can engage this. You don't need you don't need earplugs or blinkers or anything. Just engage, settle down, and really pay attention. And the Shurangama Sutra, it has an interesting piece in there. It might actually be the 52nd, because it goes through Buddha asks all these different disciples and bodhisattvas to say, how did you wake up? And he ends up with Avalokiteshvara and asks Avalokiteshvara, so how did you wake up? And he said, by paying attention to hearing. And he steps through what I just stepped through. So it can actually be a practice. You can settle down and just notice what's going on and recognize, pay attention to what is the difference I'm experiencing between sound and silence. What is the difference between that experience? And when you realize it's one you're making up, you can just keep on withdrawing. And it's just a practice, and you can do this. It's just a practice.
So online, John.
Yes. Anyone have a question, comment, thought? Feel free to raise your hand on screen or put up a digital hand, or you could even put something in the chat box.
Okay, we have a few in the room here.
Okay. I think at the moment we're good. Oh, Joe, thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your teaching. It's been a long time since I've seen you. I don't know if you would remember me, but I'm glad to see you again.
Good to see you. Remind me of your name. I'm sorry.
I'm Taizan John Lyle.
Oh, you're John, of course.
Yes. We talk about dukkha and its opposite or its contrast, sukha.
Mm-hmm.
How do you reconcile that with the absence of dualistic discriminatory thinking?
So we'll go straight to the Noble Eightfold Path as a whole, which is the practice we cultivate, right? Enlightened it's taught in the Pali Canon, and also in this. It's talked of as a raft. So the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the turning of the wheel, the first teaching. This is a long-winded answer, I'll make it quicker. So there's the three turnings of the wheel, which are acknowledging it, and then there's duties associated with each of the four, and you've got to practice on the duties until they're fully accomplished, which is realizing the end of suffering, right? At that point, you can let go of the raft. The paramita, and in the Pali Canon, the Buddha taught graduated teaching, started with generosity. You've got to have that as a foundation, because if you don't have that, you're not going to be very good at practicing the precepts. And if you don't have that as a foundation, your sitting practice isn't going to work very well. And then, hierarchies within the sitting practice. So you are becoming more subtle, ever more subtle, until you let go. So dukkha, it's one of the three marks, right? One of the others is self. Buddha actually didn't teach no self. He taught non-self, which is the same as the distinction that we can make between non-attachment and detachment. There's an openness about non-self that isn't there with no self. We are all selfing all of the time. as our practice becomes stronger, we gain more control over ourselves. So I'll show up as a different person here than I will do with my wife, with my kids, etc. Right? We gain more control over that, and the extraneous elements don't show up in necessary pieces. The harmful ego piece of it doesn't show up as much, hopefully. So we're doing this, and it becomes ever more subtle until that there's a transition moment. It's like the asymptotic curve. 1 over x, it never reaches the axis. There's these little fluctuations. It's not actually a straight line. There's these little fluctuations. When it gets close enough, one of those fluctuations will nobble it down to the axis. At that point, you just let go of self. So the distinction between sukha and dukkha is a very useful one as a practical tool for our practice. Our understanding of dukkha and sukha becomes deeper with our practice. Our experience of it becomes more subtle. The grosser elements of both are released until finally we can release the last remnant. Does that make sense?
I saw another hand over.
There's one here.
This may be apropos of nothing, but in August, I was attacked by an infection, put me in the hospital, and fortunately my daughter was there to take care of things, and I became aware of those 6 days that I had no cognition, no cognitive powers at all. It's like empty, not able to do for myself. And some of what you were saying now, I'm not going to try to force it together, but I've never had an experience, and I never want that experience. It is absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
And slowly, over the next 2 or 3 weeks, things begin to come back together. How that happened, I had no idea. And it just seems to be something there with the non-self, or when you don't have control over it.
Yeah. So I'll start by saying, you said this may come from nothing. Good. That's where it all comes from. That's where it all comes from. That really actually is the answer to the question, right? So this was a very profound experience you had, very clearly. Deep loss of identity. And there's a rather more corny one, which many people probably have had. Have you ever woken up in a hotel room, strange bed at night, and you have no idea where you are and no idea who you are?
Absolutely. When you meditate.
It does happen, but it can happen when you meditate. I mean, it's something that shows up in our lives. But this experience of waking up in a strange place with no sense of who I am, it's just such a shock. And you can feel this scrambling. If you pay attention, you can feel this scrambling for the safety of an identity. But there is a me in the middle of this. We're not free. There is clinging, there is craving going on in the middle of this. So what you experienced was, another analogy, many people here have been on extended retreats or frequent retreats will resonate with this. When you go on a retreat, first day you settle in, second day you're still settling, third day the serious stuff starts to happen. And then the timekeeper rings the bell and it's like, the bottom drops out. And you just break out sobbing. Like something has opened up. You have no idea what it is. No idea what it is. That is directly analogous to what you're talking about. It's not as deep, but it's directly analogous. Because what's happened is, as we're practicing, as we're settling, these veneers, these layers of self-protection we've created are flaking away. We're becoming more vulnerable. That shock causes a rip in the fabric, the self-defensive layers. And there's a sudden connection with this far deeper emptiness. But there's a self that's trying to hold this. It can't, totally beyond the capacity of the self. So this can be shuddering and tears, which can actually be kind of, it's not pleasant or unpleasant. It can be jarring for people. But if it goes too far, the gap is so great. Yes, it can be terrifying.
There was lots of tears
Yeah.
too in recovery.
But and you may have part of what you're remembering is probably, yes, it was terrifying, and there's something beautiful in this. I just don't have the ability to grasp or understand it. Does that resonate?
Spiritual growth.
Yeah. So it's an opportunity.
As I came out of the claws of that, there is a spiritual lessons
Yeah.
plural
Yeah.
that I need to pay attention to.
There is. So the lessons include the experience itself, the resonance of that, and the recognition that it was this physical circumstance and everything around the physical circumstance that shattered or shattered is probably too strong a word, but that broke through that ego shell such that this could happen, right? A recognition of that. And then exploration and the gap between that happening and now may be too great for this to be productive work, but it's, if it ever happens again, certainly, what is going on with me trying to pull back? What is afraid? What is experiencing fear? What is trying to reassemble out of this? Because that's the story. That's the fantasy. That's the illusion. It's not to say that it's not useful. It could be profoundly useful, but it's not you. The problem is you think it's you. And so it's looking at it clearly and saying, what is it that's trying to do this? And it's this array of sensory experiences, subjective experiences, that are trying to coalesce into a subject. Objective experience, great, it's coalescing into a subject that is causing this friction and the suffering. Is that making sense?
Yes.
Mark, we're now past noon, so anybody has a burning question, we can maybe take one more question, but I think Gareth will also be amenable to
I'll join you.
follow next time by email or
Absolutely.
in person afterwards.
Absolutely.
Anything online, John?
Yes, sir. We've got a hand up from Ishiryo.
All right, let's take one from Ishiryo.
Now, I think I'm
No, I can hear you.
You just muted yourself again.
You just muted yourself again.
Hit the bottom left one more time, take yourself off mute.
Can't hear you.
There we go.
well, okay, wonderful. Not sure that hearing me is such a great experience, but we'll take it. Thank you for your teaching. This is why one comes back to the Atlanta Soto Zen Center. Sensei, very early on, you spoke of you said mindfulness is unlimited. And that resonated with something in me, and I'm not sure what that was. Could you speak further on mindfulness is unlimited?
I'm going to go to a strange place with this. There is French monastic, 17th or 18th, I think he was 18th century, Brother Lawrence. And there's a text of his letters and his little writings called Practicing the Presence of God. Now, in mystical Christianity, God is experienced the same way as we've been talking right here. God is not somebody sitting on a puffy white cloud. God is just this awakened mind. So practicing the presence of God. This presence, practicing the presence, is precisely mindfulness. Brother Lawrence talked about how in his everyday activities, specifically washing the dishes, that's when he talked about a lot, but in his day-to-day, very mundane duties, he was cultivating and was the presence of God. So when you'll have Zen retreats, my recollection of when I used to do that is part of the practice is you'll sit for a few hours and then somebody say, okay, now it's work period. You go paint some walls, you go flush the toilet, clean the toilets, You can go work in the kitchen, and you go do your allotted work for an allotted period of time, and then the bell rings, and you put your tools down and you come back. No, oh, I'm halfway through this wall. It'll take me 5 minutes to finish. I just want to. No, put it down and come back. Your job isn't to paint the wall. There is no objective outcome here. Your job is to be present while painting the wall is happening. That presence cultivated is mindfulness. Does that answer the question?
Thank you for your teaching.
Beings are numberless, I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable, I vow to sit. Beings are numberless, I vow freedom. Delusions are inexhaustible, I to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. The way is to the soul, I vow to considering beings are numberless, so thou can free them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma is boundless, I vow to enter them. The way is unsurpassable, I to realize it.